A couple was trying to sell their lake home when they heard about St. Joseph, the patron saint of real estate. However, the only statue of St. Joseph they could find was Joseph carrying the baby Jesus. The husband refused to bury Jesus, so his wife proceeded to dig the hole on her own. She buried the statue, and a couple of months later, their house sold. After being told that it was bad luck to leave the statue behind, the wife tried to dig it up, but forgot where she buried it. That morning, she was on her hands and knees, and she began digging around the front yard, trying to find it, while her husband watched in amusement. A neighbor stopped by and asked what she was doing. The husband replied, "She's trying to find Jesus." Now, some of you thought that was funny. But some of you didn't understand what that was all about. And if you didn't understand what that was all about, it was because you missed last week's episode. Now, if you want to know why everyone else is laughing at that, make sure you catch up with last week's episode, as well as all of the previous episodes of this series. And all of our series from before are all available online. You can watch them there. Just go to wearegracepoint.com, click the link at the top that says podcast, and you can catch up and figure out why that was so funny. I think it was funny. Anyway, last week we started talking about just answering this question, why follow Jesus? This whole series has been about following Jesus, and last week we just said, okay, so what's the point? What's the reward? What do you get for following Jesus? And one of the things we saw last week was that the point of following Jesus was not to have a better life. Although you will have a better life if you follow Jesus, but that was never Jesus's point. We also saw that following Jesus the point of following Jesus was not to get a ticket to heaven. Now, Jesus did talk a couple of times and kind of connected those two, but Jesus' point was never that you should follow him so that you could get a ticket to heaven. And so when we looked at what Jesus' own words were and what he said to his followers when he was here over and over again, we discovered that the point of following Jesus is for us to have this overwhelming faith that overcomes fear. That no matter what situation we might be in, no matter what situation we might face, that we would not be paralyzed or cause ourselves to act differently out of fear. And so again, if you missed that, you're going to want to catch up. But today I want to ask a different question. Today the question that I want to ask is, what do Jesus followers wear? What are we as Jesus followers supposed to wear? Because, we know that you know what a person or who a person follows by looking at what they wear. Now, I've got pictures of a few groups of people, and what I want to do is put the pictures up on the screen there, and then you tell me, just shout it out wherever you are, based on what they're wearing, who or what is it that they follow. All right, here's the first one. That's right, Warriors, baby. All right, yes, this guy is definitely following the Warriors. All right, how about these two ladies? Yes, that's right, a couple of cheeseheads. They are following the Green Bay Packers. All right, here's a different one. Who is this guy following? Did you guess? Clearly, this is a Brazilian soccer team fan. He's got the colors, he's got the face paint, he is a fan, that's who he is following. All right, but it's not just sports, right? It's not just sports that we can tell who somebody follows by what they wear. So look at this young lady. Who does she follow? If you said that she follows the Prophet Muhammad, if she follows Islam, you're right. Just from what she wears, we can tell that that's who she follows. Or how about these gentlemen here? If you said Buddha, you got it right. These are Buddhists, and they follow the teachings of Buddha. Now, how about these gentlemen? Okay, that's right. If you guessed that they were Sikhs or that they followed Sikhism, that is who these gentlemen follow, and you can tell just by the way that they're dressed that that's who they follow. Okay, but then that brings us to Christians. Now, here is a Christian? Right? This guy looks pretty happy. He's pretty excited. We can tell just by what he's wearing that he follows, that he is a Christian. But listen, way on the other side of the spectrum are these guys. God hates you. They're also wearing something, showing something, displaying something that tells us who they are. And see, the problem is that people look at those guys and think that that's what Christians wear. And today what I want to tell you is, listen, it's time for us to not dress like a Christian. It's time for us to dress like a follower. Dress like a follower of Jesus. And so today we're going to talk about how we're supposed to dress as followers of Jesus. Now, believe it or not, the Apostle Paul, who was like the rock star of the first century church, Paul, who didn't actually spend time with Jesus before he was crucified, but he spent time with Jesus' disciples. He spent time with Matthew. He spent a lot of time with Luke. He probably spent a lot of time with John. He spent a lot of time with Jesus' mother, Mary. So Paul didn't spend time with Jesus, but he spent a lot of time with people who were with Jesus. And he listened to their stories and he read about the teachings of Jesus. And in Paul's writings, Paul tells us what we're supposed to wear as followers of Jesus. And it is so fascinating to me that this comes from Paul. Because, you know, Paul, if you did not grow up going to church, you may not know this. If you did grow up going to church and reading the Bible, then you probably already know that Paul used to go by a different name. Paul used to be called Saul of Tarsus. And you can actually read Paul's story in the book that comes after the four Gospels, the four books that were written about Jesus' life. So you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And then after that is the book of Acts, and not this kind of Acts, but ACTS. And in the 26th chapter of Acts, you can get the story of Paul, or Saul, where Saul actually describes himself as a Christian hunter. That his purpose was to go out and to hunt down Christians and to take them to prison, to lead them to their deaths. And Paul, who was a Christian hunter, came in such close contact with Christians that he eventually became one. He became a Christian. So that's where we want to start, because it's here where in Paul's writings, which reflect Jesus' teaching, we look back at Jesus' life, and Jesus actually sets the standard of behavior for his followers. And like Jesus always does, he presents it to them in very, very simple language. So we find Jesus, and he's coming to the end of his time here on earth. And he's with his disciples, but Judas had already left to betray him. And if you know that story, then you know exactly what was going on there. And Jesus realizes that he only has a little bit of time left, only a few more opportunities to give his teachings, to kind of encourage these men who he was about to leave in charge of this movement that he had started. It was all going to be on their shoulders. And he goes on and he's talking to them and he tells them, listen, he's leaving and where he's going, they can't come with him. And this kind of throws everybody for a loop, because they don't understand what he's talking about, because for the last 3 years they've followed him everywhere that he's gone, and they were willing to follow him anywhere he was going. And so Jesus is talking to them, and then Jesus says this. He says, so now I am giving you a new commandment. Now, this is not just another commandment. That word new is the Greek word kainos. And while it means new, it also means unused or strange or unheard of. So Jesus is saying, listen, I am giving you this new thing that you've never understood, you've never heard of before. This is a strange thing, but I need you to get it. He says, I'm giving you a new commandment. And then listen to what Jesus says. He says, love each other. Some of you grew up hearing this as love one another. Love each other. In other words, I want you to view each other as having so much value, of being so important, so critical to the world, that you wouldn't even think of doing harm to that other person. He says, I want you to love each other. And then this is where he raises the standard. Listen to what he says. He says, just as I have loved you, you should love each other. You see, he's raising the standard. Don't just love each other the way that you love other people now. Don't just love each other the way that you think you should love each other. You've spent 3 years with me. I want you to love each other the way that I have loved you. And he would be looking at Matthew and he'd say, Matthew, hey, remember you were a tax collector? And everyone hated you and your family despised you and none of your people wanted anything to do with you. They wouldn't even let you go in the temple. You remember that, Matthew? And when we went by your booth, Peter was there and Peter just wanted to spit on your face. But what did I do, Matthew? I called out to you and I said, come and follow me. That's the way I treated you, Matthew. That's how I want you to treat other people. I think he would have looked at Nathanael and he said, Nathanael, do you remember what you said the first time you saw me? Do you remember? Because I remember you said, can anything good come from Nazareth? I mean, come on, Nathanael, when we first met, before you even knew me, you already disrespected me, my family, my town, the place where I came from, all of my relatives. You didn't even know me. But I invited you to follow anyway. I think he would have looked around at those guys and all of them and he said, remember when we were in Capernaum? And I was teaching that big crowd of people and I started talking about eating my flesh and drinking my blood and everybody started freaking out and just wanted to leave and walk away from me. And I know that you guys were thinking the same thing. You were thinking, wow, this is too hard. I need to leave and I need to walk away. Did I leave you? Did I give you a hint that just because you were ready to leave me that I was about to leave you? See, Jesus was saying, this is how I want you to love each other. And then he says this. He says, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. You see, Jesus didn't say, listen, the miracles that you're going to do are going to prove to the world that you're my disciples. He didn't say the books that some of you are going to write are going to prove to the world that you are my disciples. He didn't say the way that some of you are going to be executed in my name are going to prove to the world that you are my disciples. No, what he said was how you treat each other, how you love each other, how your relationship is with each other, with other people. That is what is going to prove to the world that you are my disciple or my follower, because that's basically what a disciple is. A disciple is a follower. And then Peter, I love Peter because, Peter's like, Jesus is trying to teach them this thing. He's trying to give them this new concept. And Peter is still stuck on that whole, I'm going somewhere where you can't follow. And then he says something that, and he's always doing this. He says something that makes you look at him and go, oh, Peter. And listen to what Peter says. He says, Simon Peter asked, he said, Lord, where are you going? Like, I've just been trying to tell you this important thing, and all you can think about is this thing I said 20 minutes ago? Because Peter's worried, right? Because you know how Peter is. He's like, wait, I can't follow, but what, Andrew? Are you going to take Andrew with you? Because if you're going to take Andrew, I want to go. If you're taking the Thunder Brothers, if James and John are coming with you, I want to go too. Jesus said, you can't go with me now, but you will follow me later. And he's trying to, okay, Peter, I'll answer your question. But see, Jesus knew, and you and I know when we read this, Peter missed the point. See, Jesus is saying, if you decide to follow me, the way that people will know that you are following me is not how often you come to church, how loud you sing, how often you pray, how early you wake up in the morning for your morning devotions. That's not how people will know that you are my follower. The way that people will know that you are my follower is how you treat each other. Now, the problem with any religion, actually with any organization, but specifically with every religion in the world, every world religion, and I'm just going to look at us as in Christianity because that's us, so I think I can talk about us, right? But every religion always drifts away from relationship building and towards rule keeping. Religion always does that. Every religion, especially Christianity, it drifts away from relationship building and towards rule keeping. Right? The focus moves towards routines and rituals. And there's a very simple reason why. Because when we take ourselves out of relationship building and focus on rule keeping, we have a semblance of control back. Right? I know that if I just keep these rules, if I do these things, then Jesus will love me and that's all that matters. If I just follow this, I pray this many times, I read my Bible, I come to church, I give, I serve. If I just do all of these things that I know a good Christian is supposed to do, then I don't have to worry about building relationships with anybody else because I know Jesus will love me. And that's the problem. Because we can actually get to this place where I can treat someone else badly and still feel good about myself because I'm following all the rules. I can still treat someone badly, and I can even do it in the name of religion. I can even treat somebody badly in the name of Jesus, because as long as I'm following the rules and they're not, I can feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and it doesn't matter what the other person is doing because they are coming up short. You see, it's easier for us to go to church and sing loud and pray eloquently than it is to love people who are hard to love. Jesus didn't come here to discipline people. He came here to make disciples of people. He wanted people to follow him. And he knew, I think, that if we weren't focused on the relationship building, that we would slowly drift towards rule keeping. And in that, destroy relationships with people and destroy what people will know Christianity or following Jesus for. 22 years later, not hundreds of years later, but 22 years later, while the people were still alive who had seen Jesus, 22 years later, the Apostle Paul would actually see this dynamic starting to develop in the local churches. And so Paul gets into it with them. Right? Because that's what Paul did. Paul saw something that was going on and then he wrote them a letter. Just like I think if he saw the church in the United States today, he'd be writing us a letter. Paul wrote a letter to them and tells them, listen, this is what loving each other looks like in the real world. Jesus said, you know this. You've studied the scriptures. Jesus said, love one another. This is how people will know that you're a follower of Jesus, by how you love each other. Let me tell you what that looks like in your day-to-day world. And so Paul is in the city of Colossae. It's a small city, but it's an important city. It's about 100 miles or so away from the city of Ephesus. It's not there today, but at one time it was an important city. And while he is there, he writes a letter to the churches in Colossae to tell them what Christians should look like. Specifically, he tells them what Christians should wear, what we are supposed to wear as followers of Jesus. What are we supposed to wear? And it should probably worry us a little bit because at this time there were no buttons, there were no zippers, and it would still be another 1,800 years before they invented underwear. But Paul is going to tell us what we're supposed to wear. Listen to what he says. He says, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourselves, right? So he's going to tell us something that we're going to put on. This is clothes. This is something that we put on. We put on every day before we go out. Some of us, before we even leave our bedrooms, we're going to put on clothes. And Paul tells us what these clothes are. Listen, he says, you must clothe yourselves with tender-hearted mercy. Now, in the translation that we're using, it's tender-hearted mercy. The translation that you're using, it's probably the one word compassion. He says, clothe yourselves with compassion. Now, you know what compassion is? Today, if we were to say, the phrase, love someone with all your heart. Well, back then, they didn't say you have to love someone with all your heart. You know what they said? They would say, you have to love someone with all your bowels. You see, that word tender-hearted, that they translate there, tender-hearted, is actually the Greek word splachnon. Splachnon, say it, because you need to say it from down here, splachnon. And that word splachnon means bowels. It means your guts. Jesus is saying, listen, I want you to, or Paul is saying, I want you to have compassion that is so deep that you can feel it down there. I mean, have you ever encountered someone or seen a situation where you can feel the compassion and it doesn't hit you up here, it hits you down here? That's what he was saying. He says, I want you to feel that kind of compassion towards people. I want you to look at somebody and feel what it is that they're experiencing. And let yourself feel it so deep inside, it's as if you are feeling it too. And I want you to respond to them because you know the way that they are feeling. He says, clothe yourself with compassion. And then he says, clothe yourself with kindness. Do you know what kindness is? Kindness is simply loaning your strength, your abilities, your influence to somebody else. Loaning of yourself to someone else. To giving something of yourself to someone that doesn't cost them anything, but it costs you something. That's what kindness is. And then he says, clothe yourself with humility. Now, he's talking about humility specifically in the context of how we relate to each other and how we and our relationship to God. That's what he's talking about when he talks about humility. To see ourselves correctly in relationship to each other and in relationship to God. In other words, what Paul is saying is that when we look at ourselves to each other, that we're not supposed to look at each other and go, well, I'm smarter than you are, I'm richer than you are, I'm much better looking than you are, any of those things, because ultimately, you and I are the same. We came into the world without any choice as to where we were going to be born, who we were going to be born to, if we were going to be rich or poor, what race we were going to be. We have no clue. We had anything to do with any of that. And for most of us, we don't know when it is that we're going to leave this world. We don't know when we are going to die. Paul is saying, look, when we look at each other with the right relationship, the right understanding of who we are, we realize that we're all the same. We're the same. We're essentially the same. That there is nothing greater or weaker or anything, that we are all flawed, that we are all the same. And yet, because we understand our relationship with God, that we all have value because we are all children of our Heavenly Father. And our Heavenly Father loves every single person exactly the same. He loves me as much as He loves you, as much as He loves every person who is in a prison, as much as He loves every person who is dedicated their life to serving Him. He loves us all the same. The only thing that makes us special is our love of God, but a love for God and God's love for us. Other than that, there is nothing different about us. We're all the same. He says, clothe yourself with gentleness. You know what gentleness is? Gentleness is taking into consideration someone else's strengths and weaknesses and then responding to them not out of our strength, but depending on where their strength and their weakness is. In other words, Paul is saying, listen, I know that you have the ability to scale up and down how you respond to people, right? How you respond to people, you have control over. So instead of responding to people out of your strength and pushing people around and bullying people around and showing people that I'm richer, I'm more good looking, I'm more influential, I'm more powerful, instead of using your strength, that you meet people at their strength or their weakness. That's what gentleness is. And then he says, clothe yourself with patience. Patience is simply making the decision to go at someone else's pace than insisting on going at your own pace. He goes on and he says, make allowance for each other's faults. Make allowance for each other's faults. So listen, we all have faults. We all have faults. But remember, every one of us is supposed to be here. Every one of us has a right to be here. And so we have to respond to each other where they are as if that's where they're supposed to be. And then he says, then forgive anyone who offends you. And for a lot of us, this is the hardest thing. Because you know what? When someone offends you, they owe you something. They owe you a debt because they've taken something from you. When someone offends you, they've taken something and you want something back. You want that debt paid. That might be restitution of your reputation. That debt may be paid through an apology. They owe it to you. And Paul is saying, listen, when you forgive someone who offends you, you're basically saying, I forgive that debt. You don't owe it to me. You don't owe the apology to me. You don't owe the restitution to me. Forgive them when they offend you. And he says, listen, I know that it's hard. I know that there's some people you just can't imagine how you would ever get the power to forgive them. And listen to what he says. He says, remember, the Lord forgave you. You think what you did to that person is offensive? Think about what you have done to the Lord. He says, listen, He forgives you. The minute, the second, as the words are coming out of your mouth, you've been forgiven. And listen, if God can forgive you that easily, then we should be able to forgive others that easily. And then Paul says, above all. In other words, he's giving us that final piece of clothing. He's giving us the overcoat. The part that we're going to put over all of the other clothes. Right? Because he's saying these are all important things. But the one that I want you to put over the top, the coat that covers it all, he says, above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. What he's saying here is that, listen, all of those things, sometimes it's going to be hard to put them all together, but when you put love over it, that is what is going to join us here. That's the most important thing. That is a reflection back to what Jesus said, love one another. Love one another. That's how people will know that you are my followers. And Paul says when we do that, when we put that coat of love over everything else, that love is what is going to bind us together. That love is what is going to make it so that even when on those moments when I can't feel the compassion, when I forget to feel the compassion, when I don't show the compassion, that the love will still keep us together. In those moments when I forget to be gentle, when I'm pushing my strength on someone else, that I will be clothed in love and it will still bind us together. So here's what Jesus' followers are supposed to wear: compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, forgiveness, and love. This is what we are supposed to put on every day. Now, I have to tell you, isn't that exactly what you would expect the pastor to tell you? Right? Like you're going to church, you're hearing a message, and this is what you think the pastor is going to say. Hey, be compassionate, be kind, be humble, be gentle, right? This is what you expect him to say. And sometimes it can feel like, yeah, you can do that. You're a pastor. But here's the problem. How am I going to get any work done? How am I going to accomplish anything in my life if I have to do all of these things? Because as I think about going to work on Monday morning, as I think about going to school, as I think about dealing with my family, and you don't know my family, or dealing with my friends or my neighbors, as I go to the store, as I go to the bank, as I negotiate deals, as I try to find a new job, it's like, Paul, come on, if I treat everyone like this, how am I ever going to get anything done? I think about that too. And then I have to remember who's writing this. This is Paul, the Apostle Paul, who got more done than any of you and I ever will. Paul, who spent his life, the second half of his life, going around to the known world, going to the Gentiles, people who weren't the Jews, people like most of you and me, telling them about Jesus, starting churches in the places where they were. He traveled around the entire known world. At the same time, while he was writing just about half of what we call today the New Testament. He had to defend himself in court. He was beaten. He was stoned. He was bitten by snakes. He was had to ride on boats while he was writing. The boats crashed. They were shipwrecked. Paul went through all of these things and still was able to treat other people with compassion and kindness, with humility and gentleness, with patience, with forgiveness, and with love. It can be done. If Paul can do it, Paul who 2,000 years later, listen, 2,000 years from now, no one is going to know any of us. 2,000 years later, we're still talking about Paul. It can be done. And it's not about changing your personality or changing your work ethic. It's simply putting on a new filter. A filter that you run everything you do and everything you say through. It's simply about putting on clothes. The clothing that Paul talks about, that followers of Jesus wear. Now, I know here's the problem. Some of you, you're watching us online. You've enjoyed today's message. You're like, hey, that was great. And then you're going to turn this off and you're going to start scrolling and swiping through something else. Or maybe it's dinner time and you're heading out to go have dinner and you're going to forget about it. So I tried to figure out, okay, how can I make it so that you guys will remember this? So here's what I want to do. I want you to think of your favorite romantic comedy. Your favorite romantic comedy. Mine, very easy. It's this. You know this movie? My favorite, When Harry Met Sally. Best. Billy Crystal at his peak, right? Meg Ryan. So think about, what is your favorite romantic comedy? You got it? You thinking of it? Can you imagine it? You can see the pictures, see who's in it? Okay. Here in our contemporary culture, what do we call romantic comedies? We call them chick flicks. And some of them are even rated PG. Although lately a lot of them have not been rated PG, but I want you to think of chick flick PG. Chick flick PG. Okay? You got it? Your movie is a chick flick PG. All right, now, here is what you're supposed to clothe yourself with. That's how you're going to remember it. Chick flick PG. Compassion, humility, kindness, forgiveness, love, kindness. Had to put kindness in there twice to make it work. Patience and gentleness. Chick flick PG. And so this, I know this is stupid, right? And some of you are going, oh my goodness, and you're rolling your eyes. But listen, trust me. An hour from now, 2 hours from now, tomorrow morning, you're still going to remember chick flick PG. And you're going to have an image of that movie that is your favorite romantic comedy. And so every morning, what my hope is, my prayer for you is that you wake up every morning and you think to yourself, okay, I am going to mentally put on what Jesus followers are going to wear. And that you can even pray, your prayer this morning is, Lord, I want to put on compassion today. I want to meet people and feel and experience what they're experiencing. And I want to respond to people not out of my flesh, not out of my instant reaction, but to actually pause a moment and experience what it is they're experiencing. And for that moment, just as I experience it, respond to them in that way. That, Lord, I want to put on humility today. Help me put on humility today. Help me to see each other people, and recognize that I'm no better, no worse than they are. And that the only thing that makes me or them special is your love for us. Help me to respond to people with kindness. Help me to leverage my strength, my ability, my resources, my influence for someone else. Help me to use that for someone else. Lord, I have so many people in my life that I just can't imagine how I'm going to forgive them. But I know that the forgiveness doesn't come from me. It comes from you because of how you forgave me. So let me put on forgiveness today, that I can forgive other people, regardless of what it is that they've done for me. Lord, let me put on love. Let me treat everybody in the way that you have treated me. Let me put on kindness. Let me meet people at their pace today. Give me patience today. As I put patience on, let me not insist that people have to move at my pace, but let me go ahead and agree to slow down, sometimes even speed up a little bit to meet people at their pace. And then, Lord, let me put on gentleness today. Let me not meet people with my strength, but let me meet people where they are in their strength or in their weakness. Let me meet them where they are. Not to try to show them how important I am or how much money I make or any of the things that people use to impress other people. Let me not be worried about impressing anybody today, but let me worry about meeting people where they're at today. Lord, let me put on what Jesus followers are supposed to put on just today. Now listen, it is not natural to do this. I get it. It is not natural. In fact, if it was natural, Jesus wouldn't have had to say it. If it was natural, Paul wouldn't have had to clarify it. The reason that that Jesus said it, the reason that Paul clarified it, is because it's not natural. It goes against our natural inclination. But what's our option? To put this on, like these guys? You see, here's the problem with these two sets of people, right? The problem with them is this. They are wearing what they're wearing to make a point. Jesus calls us to put on the clothes, to clothe ourselves in Jesus' followers' wear so that we can make a difference. See, Jesus didn't come here to make a point. If Jesus came here to make a point, he wouldn't have had to die for us. If Jesus came here to make a point, he wouldn't have had to live all of those years here. He could have come down in 30 minutes, he could have given his point, zapped a few people into obedience, and then he would have been gone. But Jesus didn't come to make a point. He came to make a difference. He came to make a difference. And Jesus calls us as followers of Jesus. He calls churches as groups of people who are followers of Jesus to go into the world, not to make a point, but to make a difference. And the way that we make a difference is not by how often we go to church. It's not how closely we follow the rules. It's not how accurate our belief system is. But it's how we love each other. How people see that we treat one another. My prayer for you, for me, for all of us, is that we would wake up each morning with just this intentionality of clothing ourselves in what Jesus' followers should wear. Just remember it, chick flick, PG. And if you keep that in mind, you'll be on the way of not making a point, but making a difference in the lives of other people and in your life too.
Thank you for joining us for this week's message. Gracepoint Church is located in South San Francisco, California. For additional content or to find out more information about Gracepoint Church, visit us online at wearegracepoint.com.